Hi, I'm Tanya, and this is Zobi. Say hi, buddy. And welcome to our YouTube channel. So since I have announced my intent to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail in 2022, I have received a lot of questions, both online and from friends and family in person. So additionally, on this channel, aside from documenting the Appalachian Trail, I'm going to continue to upload a bunch of recaps from my full-time RV life and adventures, things that I've done in the past with this past summer and fall until the RV broke down. And then after the AT, when the RV is fixed and I get it back, I will continue to document that life as well. Hiking and kayaking and scuba diving and all kinds of adventures, just exploring this country and bringing God's creation to those who don't necessarily get a chance to explore it on their own. So back to the AT, I figured I'd go ahead and do an introduction video and a Q&A, so this can be helpful to potentially future thru-hikers who may stumble across this video. And also it's just something that I can post and say, hey everyone, here's the answers to your questions, so I don't have to keep answering the same ones over and over again. And give you an introduction as to who am I? Why on earth do you want to follow this particular girl on a thru-hike? And maybe you don't want to, but I do have an adorable dog, so you know, there's that. So the two most popular questions that I keep getting are why? Why do you want to do this? And two, well, what do you hope to gain from it? Aside from the obvious physical challenge, like is there something more? Is there a deeper reason as to the why? What do you want to gain from this? Well, to appropriately answer those questions, I'm going to ask that you take a little bit of time here in video number 1. There's going to be a second part with the other Q&As, where I answer those two questions by being vulnerable and opening up and sharing a small part of my story with you all. So you can understand where I am today, a little bit of how I got to where I am today, and what I really do hope to gain from this thru-hike of the Appalachian Trail. People tend to think I grew up hiking and enjoying outdoor adventures, but that is actually definitely not the case. I actually didn't spend any time in the mountains until I was an adult, and didn't start seriously hiking until I was in my mid-30s. Growing up in the cornfields of Indiana, my family took an annual vacation to the beaches of Florida. And don't get me wrong, I have a very deep love for the sea, white sand beaches, sunshine, and palm trees. But every year as we drove through Tennessee and Georgia, I would look out the window and wonder at those rolling hills, the rocky cliffs carved away for the highway to pass through, and wish we could stop to explore just for a day or two. It wasn't until I was 23 and honeymooned in the Smoky Mountains that I finally had that wish granted. I'll never forget the first time I ever set foot on a hiking trail, how the trees embraced me in their canopy, hearing the soothing trickle of the river and feeling my pulse quickening coming face to face with a deer, who could have cared less about me. I was captivated by this new world. Living in Florida, we did our best to also enjoy the mountains only a day's drive away, making backpacking trips to North Georgia with friends and long weekends in the Smokies. I was fortunate enough to work for a travel magazine based out of Gatlinburg, so I made frequent trips during those years and tried to spend time on the trails, and also got to go whitewater rafting and other outdoor adventures in the mountains. Then in 2013, I got divorced. And that was followed by an unhealthy, toxic relationship that was killing me from the inside out. For privacy reasons, I left Florida in the middle of the night, with only a few people knowing how to reach me, and fled to the sanctuary of the Smoky Mountains. I lived in Tennessee for a year and spent every spare minute on the trails crying out to God in His creation. And He met me there. The trees heard my cries, and the wildlife witnessed my tears. The rushing rivers and crashing waterfalls washed away the pain as I healed and grew close to God again in those hills and valleys. Following my time in Tennessee, I moved to North Atlanta, where I continued hiking my way through North Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia, getting more and more serious about my gear, my skills, and my confidence to tackle longer and more challenging hikes. But in 2017, the place I will likely forever call home in my heart grabbed hold of me again, and I returned to Tampa Bay. These last 4 years, I continued regular trips to the mountains with friends, but in 2021, the kaleidoscope of my life shifted yet again. In my personal life, I had finally taken a chance on this guy a friend who had always expressed some interest in me, but I had held off at arm's length, and we became more than friends. But unfortunately, to my dismay, it became this on again, off again, non-relationship, never really in a clear status relationship that was just riddled with inconsistency and lies of omission, literally from day one. But me being me, I did what I always do, and I ignored those red flags and pressed on, insistent to try to make this relationship work. And over time, I realized that I was getting back into that black hole of sadness and depression from an unhealthy, toxic, emotionally abusive relationship that at the time I just wasn't seeing and wasn't correlating what was happening with things that I had experienced in the past. On top of that, during all of this, I was becoming increasingly disenchanted with my real estate career and increasingly burned out. So I knew I needed a change, but I wasn't sure what. I began praying about it and really felt called to explore a deeper purpose in using my passions and my talents, my passion for travel and adventure, and my talents for fine art and writing. So I just began thinking and praying that this calling was leading me to simplify my life, to sell everything and go travel the country in an RV and paint and blog and bring God's creation to people who can't experience it otherwise. And so, in July of 2021, I sold my waterfront condo in Clearwater, along with most of my possessions, and took off with Zoe to travel and explore this country, the adventure of a lifetime. I immediately headed out west to test my hiking abilities at altitude the Colorado 14ers were calling. I spent a couple months hiking through Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah, including 13 14ers, Glacier, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and Rocky Mountain National Parks, as well as a car camping road trip through Utah hitting all 5 of those national parks. And then, unfortunately, come October, my RV needed a repair and couldn't be driven. So, finding myself physically grounded in Colorado, I decided I also needed to stop and evaluate my emotional, spiritual, and mental health as well. Despite selling my condo and starting to travel the country in my RV, that back and forth, severely inconsistent and confusing relationship was continuing with all of its inconsistency, and it was just emotionally ripping me apart, and it took a very severe, damaging toll on me. It had been a year of this, and I was absolutely an emotional basket case. At that point, I didn't even know who I was. I didn't recognize myself. I looked in the mirror, and where was this vibrant, cheerful, happy, loving, confident, godly woman that I had been so proud of growing into over the years? She was gone, and I was just utterly lost. So, through advice and love of friends, and more so through a lot of very heart-wrenching, tearful prayers while hiking out in the wilderness, and the Montana mountains heard these cries, I really began to pray to see what others were seeing, that they could clearly see the manipulative tactics of this guy and how I was in this emotional state that I had been in previously at the hands of another emotionally abusive narcissistic relationship. And I just didn't see that. I kept denying it and saying, I couldn't correlate these two men. They were so different to me. So I just really began to pray is there any truth to this, Lord? Please allow me to see the truth and remove blinders. And he did. And that was one of the hardest and most disappointing revelations and things that I've ever had to process in my life, was realizing that this really great guy, this man of God that I had looked up to and attributed all of these amazing godly characteristics to, was not who I thought he was. And I began to see the hypocrisy and the abuse, and I didn't recognize it at the time, but I began to see it. And with all of this happening, by the time my RV broke down and I was in Colorado, I had hit a point where I absolutely hated myself. I hated myself. I believed for the first time in my life that I wasn't good enough for even God, that even God didn't love me. I had been told by him and his friends, who are no longer my friends, that I was spiritually bankrupt. I was morally, deficit, and, obviously not a good Christian, spiritually immature, and unworthy of relationships, whether it be friendship or romantic relationships, and basically love of any type. And I believed all of that, and I internalized it, and truly, truly believed that even God didn't love me, and actually that my life was just a cycle of punishment for being such a horrible person. There was a Christian-based counseling center in Buena Vista, Colorado, where I was, and they do a 2-week intensive therapy retreat, which is literally 1 full year of therapy in 2 all-day, emotionally intense weeks. Deep in the heart of the Rockies, those 2 weeks changed my life. I'll never forget sitting beside the river my last day, throwing rocks that I had written false beliefs I had held true about myself into the cascading river, the living water washing them clean, and my soul. I left Colorado that day and car camped my way back east, where I spent a week in my beloved Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia mountains, hiking familiar trails in glorious autumn colors, chasing waterfalls that continued to cleanse my soul and heal. I had thought after Thanksgiving my RV would be repaired, but alas, it was not meant to be, so I headed to Florida for a visit, which turned into a month. With Christmas and the New Year approaching, and still an indefinite time frame as to the RV repair, I was, for all intents and purposes, homeless. So there I was, sitting in line at the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru one morning, praying about what on earth my next steps are. I was debating about trying to find a rental. How could I possibly find a short-term furnished rental during the Florida Snowbird and spring break season? Anything that might still be available from month to month, or like 3 or 6 month lease, is going to be astronomical. And I just couldn't stomach the thought of throwing all of that money away. And yes, I have friends, I can hopscotch around, stay with them here, stay with them there, but gotta be honest, you start outweighing your welcome at some point, especially when you have a dog. So I just wasn't sure what to do, and kind of out of nowhere, I hear this like voice in my head saying, "Thru-hike the AT," and I pretty much immediately dismissed it. I was like, no, that's okay. Something I've always thought about doing, but like the reality of actually doing it, when you really sit down and think about like living outside for 6 months and your life is on hold for 6 months. And for me, I looked at Zobi sitting beside me and I was like, I can't be away from him for 6 months, and he can't be away from me for 6 months. And I can't take him on the trail for 6 months, like an overnight or hike, that's one thing, but like living on the trail. So I just kind of dismissed it all. But the thought kept nagging at me. And so I got home and started doing more research. I was already in AT groups and forums, and because I've done some section hiking, but really began digging more into what it takes to actually do a thru hike. And through all of that, I came across a forum that also had a link to Thru-hiking with dogs, a page and a group where people were talking. And so I really began reading through all of that, and it was then that I began to actually feel like I was getting good information about how I could actually do this and bring Zobi. So I began to actually picture myself doing this. So I kind of went to a friend, and it was a friend that is very, very logical, and I was sure was going to ask like a million questions and tell me, no, 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 don't do this, you're crazy. And kind of mention, hey, here's what I'm thinking since I am homeless and have the opportunity. And she did ask a few questions, and then to my great surprise, she was like, I totally think you should do this. This is the time. God has aligned everything, and you need to take this opportunity. Go do it. And I was like, seriously? Wasn't expecting that. So spent some more time, kind of became obsessed with watching YouTube videos. I think I've watched like all of them out there on the AT now. And thank you everyone for recording your thru hikes and your documentaries and all of your tips and gear tips and hiking with dog tips and everything else that I have like absorbed like a mad person. And it took about a week and talking to some other people and of course praying about it. But in the end, the answer was clear. Things in my life have aligned in a way that it is time to go through hike the AT. So to answer the questions all the way back to the beginning of this video, why are you doing this? What do I hope to gain from it? Well, the obvious answer to the why is what I just stated. Things have aligned. I am literally homeless. I have money in the bank. It's more affordable to do a thru hike than to rent right now. I have my health and I have the will to do it. The deeper reason, the more emotional answer, and what has been the bulk of this video in sharing my story is I've practiced this and I'm trying not to cry. I've been broken. Like many of us, 2020 and 2021 have been very hard years. Mine have been probably the hardest years of my life. And I reached a point where I was utterly broken and didn't even recognize the pieces that made the whole any longer. So I'm very proud of myself for digging out of that pit and beginning to take the steps necessary to start putting those pieces back together. I'm still working on that. It's still a process. So once upon a time, deep in the mountains of Appalachia, God took me there to provide healing. And he heard my cries and met me in those mountains and valleys. And now life is aligned to return me back to Appalachia and continue the healing and put me back together. My prayer is that when I summit Mount Katahdin, I'm celebrating a journey that's not just of miles, but of miracles. Because every step, every day, every week, every month on that trail, I'm praying for a small miracle. That person, that quote, that message, that place that I'm in, that is an encouragement and a redirection to God to help continue my healing. And that this is going to not only be the process of overcoming the struggles and the pain of the physical journey, but that my emotional journey will reflect that and I'll overcome it as well. So that in the end, I'll be able to look in the mirror and recognize myself again. That I will see that beautiful, vibrant, happy, confident woman full of love for God and others. And know that she can do anything she puts her mind to. I hope you enjoy the journey.